For over a year now, Montanans have faced skyrocketing property taxes. That tax hike has really threatened the livelihoods and of working Montanans and retired Montanans, and it's forced some to even sell their homes and or downsize. We heard we heard this story and the stress it's creating when we traveled thousands of miles across the state to have listening sessions in a number of cities. And it was a consistent theme that came up over and over again, that people were really feeling the hurt on the property tax increase. We feel like this is a crisis the governor and the Republican-led legislature could have dealt with, and they did not. And in some ways, they deepened the crisis by giving tax breaks to major corporations, while the rest of us are stuck with higher property tax bills. And just for your information, Bowen, if you didn't know, property taxes are kind of complicated, but it is a bit of a zero-sum game. So if residential property taxes go up, as they did pretty dramatically, then industrial, commercial goes down with it. And that's what we saw happen. And so one of our intents is to try and rebalance that. So we have a three-part plan, and the highlights of the plan are that it would result in a reduction of property taxes statewide of $214 million and would provide $14 million in relief for small businesses. We would also, with that, as I mentioned, reverse more than $100 million of Republicans' tax giveaways to major corporations, returning that benefit to everyday Montanans who are trying to pay their property tax and stay in their home. To be specific, our plan has three planks. One is a homestead exemption that covers primary residences and Montana small businesses. Also a new fair structure for residential property tax rates. And finally, a housing fairness tax credit that provides further relief for working Montanans of low and middle incomes. First piece, the homestead exemption would be $50,000 of your home's value would be exempt from property tax. And likewise for small businesses, the first $200,000 of the value of their property would be exempt from property tax. We would also create a different approach to property tax calculations. So it would be a series of tiers, 6 property tax levels. And as the value of your home goes up, you pay slightly more at higher values. So, for example, homes that fall in the category of 100 to 200 or 500,000 would pay a smaller or lower rate than those that are over $1.5 million. And so it's a slightly different structure than what we have now. To give an example, the medium home in Gallatin County, which I represent, would see a tax cut of 17% or about $629 million a year.
Out of curiosity, I'll have to excuse my ignorance. How does it work now? I always figured it was sort of a tier system. But
it's basically we're all paying the same. 1%, I believe now, and then 1.89 at the highest valued. I think it's over 1.5 goes to 1.89 also, which is also our highest tax bracket. So there is that. So we just added a bunch of brackets, several brackets.
And something I did catch was you guys want to look at some of the existing loopholes right now and sort of fix stuff. Could you mind expanding on that for me?
Yeah, so over the last couple decades, we've created exceptions for commercial and industrial property and centrally assessed property. So they have Their property values essentially don't inflate at the same rate as residential property taxes. And so that's why this property tax shift occurs. So because counties are capped, right, at 2.5% of, or half of inflation, which this year is 2.5%. So as residential property taxes go up and you have a cap, then that's the zero-sum gain part. Then somebody else has got to go down. And it was the commercial, industrial, and centrally assessed taxes that were going down. And that's the tax shift in part that we want to correct by focusing on these exceptions, exemptions, loopholes, whatever you want to call them, that have been assigned to those commercial, industrial, and centrally assessed properties. So it's a little fairer treatment between residential and those property owners.
And so is this three-part plan, is this being presented as like a piece of legislation to address at next year's legislative session?
Yeah, so I this morning put in a bill draft request for these three planks, and it'll send at this point would probably be captured in two separate pieces of legislation.
Okay, thank you. And is there anything that you're worried that people will like misconstrue with this? Or do you think it's pretty straightforward?
Well, there's probably nothing about property taxes that are straightforward. I think the bottom line is what we're doing is directly addressing the property tax burden that has blasted Montanans with this last tax year and will again this tax year, and finding a way to reduce those taxes so it's easier to build into your budget and fair, and much more fair than our current system, which we think penalizes the average Montanan.
And again, you'll have to excuse my ignorance. Would this hurt the general fund at all, or local government general funds, or not really?
It will not affect counties and county funding. It will not affect school funding. It could affect general fund receipts, and that would depend on whether we companion these bills with also an effort that we're also introducing to address these exceptions or loopholes for commercial and the centrally assessed properties.
Something else I sort of caught a little bit of during the conference was dipping into some of the surplus of the general fund. Is that correct? Or
right now, it appears we're going to have an ending fund balance of probably $700 or $800 million, possibly higher. And so to the extent that these tax proposals affect the general fund, we feel at this point there's plenty of cushion there to absorb this kind of reduction in revenues. And based on our priorities, this should be right near the top and something that we fund and give our Montana taxpayers a break on their property taxes.